Hey, and thanks for connecting with us on our Good Friday Bible study. My name is Matt. I'm the lead pastor at Westminster Baptist Church, and I hope you've been having some community and also considering the cross of Jesus Christ. We are going to be in Romans chapter 5 just for a few minutes, and I want to point you to verse 18 and 19. So as we look towards that, and as you turn in your Bibles, we're going to be aiming towards Romans 6, which is talking about the resurrection. We're going to talk about that at Easter, so I hope you'll come join us with that. But as we look at verse 18 and 19, it says, "So then, as through one trespass there is condemnation for everyone, so also through one righteous act there is justification leading to life for everyone. For just as through one man's disobedience the many were made sinners, so also through the one man's obedience the many will be made righteous." So here's what's going on here. The one man is Adam, and the next man is Jesus. So the first man is the one who sins, that is, he desires more than what God has for him, and therefore it leads to many sinners who are all desiring more than what God has for him. Then you have the next man, which is Jesus, who is not desiring more than what God the Father has for him, but is perfectly content and is willing to take on less than what God has for humanity. See, God had a perfect life for humanity, but because Adam wanted more, Jesus comes and shows us what it looks like to humbly take what the Father has for him, which is ultimately to experience human experiences like the depravity of man with Satan's temptations and persecutions and his best friends betraying him and his family turning from him. He has all these experiences which are less than what God intended for humanity, but are perfectly fulfilling obedience by following the plan of God because of the first experience of Adam disobeying what God has for him. You see, God had called humanity to be in his presence with him, not desiring more than what God had given them, but being perfectly content with the presence of God and with what God had provided them. So what Adam wants is more than what God had provided him. And so that's that first sin, is disobeying what God had for them by desiring more. And so here comes Jesus. Adam wants to be like God. Jesus is willing to be like humans, to take less than what Adam desired, to take the flesh of man, to take those temptations, to take that depravity. So Jesus is faithfully obeying what God the Father had for him. That's that one act of obedience. So in verse 18, where it says, "So also through one righteous act, there is justification leading to life for everyone." And then it says in verse 19, "So also through one man's obedience, the many will be made righteous." That's what's happening there, is Jesus' obedience to the cross is the manifestation of his faithfulness throughout his life to do what God the Father had for him. And you look at the cross and you go, okay, that's really the jealousy point where humanity was jealous at Jesus. The Pharisees, scribes, and Sadducees, those religious leaders, were jealous that Jesus was doing exactly what God the Father had called him to do. They didn't like Jesus. They didn't like that he comes and preaches the law and then fulfills the law. And we see this throughout history. In fact, in Adam's lineage, we see this the story of Cain and Abel, where there's jealousy because um, the faithfulness of one, the other is jealous that there's faithfulness to God, and therefore he kills him. And that pattern continues out through all the way to Jesus when they kill Jesus. Jesus' faithful obedience is to take upon himself the perfect obedience and the disobedience of humanity. He perfectly obeys, but he also takes our disobedience upon him. So in that, the death of Christ is the death of our sin, and the resurrection of Christ is raising us into life. What that means for you is that the guilt, the shame, the pain of sin, all of those things are dying at the cross. And in the goal of Christ, the purpose of Christ, what Christ is doing is raising that we might have new life. And many people look at the cross and see the pain that Jesus endured and all these different things. And I want to just highlight for you this moment, this obedience factor, that the cross is the obedience of Christ fulfilling what we were disobedient in. And when he does it joyfully. Hebrews tells us that Jesus does this joyfully. The joy that lay before him is what it says. Because Jesus is willing to lay down his life for his friends. And he also is willing to lay down his life for his enemies. You see, there's a joy in Jesus to give, whereas in humanity it's to take. For Adam, it was to take. For Cain and Abel's situation, it was to take. For Pharisees and Sadducees, it was to take. But for Jesus, it's to give. So the joy of Jesus is the faithful obedience in the cross to give to humanity the opportunity for new life. So Jesus is joyfully taking the cross in that moment. It's an obedient moment. It's a joyful giving of Christ, gracious and forgiveness to all in that moment. So the cross of Christ, as you reflect on it, remember that Jesus was doing what we did not do. He was not desiring more than what God the Father had for him, but faithfully fulfilling exactly what the Father had for him. Whereas Adam was unfaithful and desired more, Jesus was faithful and took the cross. So I hope you will consider the impact of that in your life. When you feel disobedience, shame, and guilt, remember Christ died so that he might take all of that, fulfilling what you should have done, but also bearing the burden of what you didn't do, so that it might die and you might live. I hope these implications will lead to you thinking through and preparing for the resurrection of Jesus Christ as we think through that on Easter Sunday. So I just want to invite you to Westminster Baptist Church to come and reflect on what the power of the resurrection might do for your life. All right. So thanks for pondering this. I hope you will consider and continue to contemplate this in your community there.